feel about what the president is doing here? You're a Republican. It feels like he's picking winners and losers.
Well, listen, I think, you know, as we know, there's been a lot of theater with this White House, and this president has always been sort of the master of suspense. I think just like your piece that we saw with the manufacturer in Holland, Michigan is concerned, there's a lot of uncertainty out there. And the real question is, where does it go from here? I know in town this week in Washington, the Mexicans are here, the Europeans are here, the Chinese are here, all trying to sort of ferret out where this sort of trade effort is going to end up. And a lot of uncertainty. I'm suspect of whether there's going to be any resolution this month, as some suspect, in terms of NAFTA. If so, great. But I think longer term, we've got to keep our eyes on China.
On China, we've had Derek Scissors on from AEI. He says give up on a deal with China. It's not going to happen. The things we want them to change about what they do, they can't do it. What do you think about that?
I think with China, you know, the president has always labeled trade deficits to be the #1 problem. I really believe the #1 problem is intellectual property theft. And, you know, if we're ever going to see some resolution here, I think we're going to need to see the president start to talk to the American people about what it is that he's after. And when we see that begin to shift, I think there is some potential when the president runs into or sees President Xi in the upcoming multilateral gatherings that we have in the fall, that there could be some progress made. But again, maybe it's about a midterm election play. Who knows? All of us are getting, I think, seasoned in the art of trying to separate theater from substance here, and there's just a lot of uncertainty right now.
Would you trust the Chinese to live up to any agreement they might make on intellectual property?
Listen, I mean, there is certainly this sort of trust but verify with the Chinese. There's no question about that. I think one of the things that the Trump administration did early on through not only its national security messaging and saying that we have a national security interest in competing and engaging with China, but also in terms of the Defense Department, our national defense strategy says, look, we've got to be very concerned about the direction the Chinese are heading in terms of intellectual property theft and what that means for our national security. So I am very cautious in terms of the outlook for where we can eventually end up with China.
Sort of a trust but verify, I guess.
Exactly.
I'm glad you brought up the military side of this, because that's been a key piece when you're talking about intellectual property theft, when you talk about targeting advanced manufacturing. You're talking about capabilities that directly benefit the military, and that's been the other side of this with China, is that they've been flexing their might increasingly in the Asian region of the world.
There's no question about it, and I know that the president just had a very extensive interview with Reuters, and I think, again, an interview that covered a variety of topics that I think each and every one of us could expect maybe a day's worth of coverage. But again, in the age of Donald Trump, it is just another day and another news cycle. But remember, he talked about his engagement with North Korea, with Kim Jong-un, and his disappointment that the Chinese have not stepped up and been more cooperative. So I think all of this is converging on where our national security interests lie and how we can see that play out up against the Chinese.
You are kind to indulge us on trade, but I'll bet you are on Manafort watch like the entire town is down there. Everybody waiting on pins and needles to see what happens. Paul Manafort, for a short time, was President Trump's campaign manager. What are the implications, you think, for the president if he's found guilty and if he's found not guilty?
Well, I mean, obviously, if Paul Manafort's found guilty, it doesn't reflect well on the fact that he was hired as campaign manager for Donald Trump back in the early days after the nomination was secured, or during right before the nomination was secured. So again, it doesn't reflect well. I think the president spoke out. He commented on Twitter, which was, again, very unconventional and not normal for an American president to speak out while a jury is deliberating. But that's what we've come to find with President Trump. You know, he came into office saying he was going to you know, break up the norm, and that's what he's doing.
Will the Republicans hold the House?
Well, I certainly hope so, obviously. And, if we step back and look at history.
I knew you'd hope so. I'm asking whether you think they will.
Listen, I think the country should hope so because, look what's going on with the economy. I think all of us, as in my now, new role, not so new anymore, 4 years at Moelis & Company, we see our clients very optimistic about what's going on in terms of economic policy and just the general sense that we've got a government in Washington who understands the necessity for risk-taking. And it was something that we never saw before. But are we going to see a Republican victory? Again, too early to tell as we're 60-some, 70-some days out from the midterms.
Okay, all right.
But
doesn't want to take a stand. Okay, we got to go, but finish up.
Well, listen, I certainly hope so.